Hey, so it's me, Sally Britton, and today I am taking you on a little virtual tour of part of Castle Beaver, the castle that has inspired Castle Cleaver in my Regency romance series. So, Castle Beaver is an absolutely incredible place. I was able to visit there last November, and I loved every second of my time there. So I'm going to share with you a few of the pictures I took and just some of the things that I happen to know about this awesome castle. All right, let's begin. This is what the castle would look like if you were pulling up back in the old days in a carriage. This would be your first glimpse of this incredible castle from the drive, which is up a very steep hill. These modern days, there's a parking lot for guests that is super nice and off to, see, this is the east side, it's off to the west side of the castle. So I walked up to the castle through a whole bunch of trees, but you would have driven up this long drive if you were visiting the castle as a guest. All right. So before we really dig in, I think it's important that you know a little bit about who made the castle what it is today. The Duke and Duchess of Rutland, so this is John Henry Manners, who was the fifth Duke of Rutland, I believe. I think I've got that right. He inherited the title fairly young. He was in his early 20s because his father passed unexpectedly. And because he was so young, and the full weight of the duchy was settled on him, he also needed to marry right away. A lot of times, Duke's sons, noble sons in general, didn't marry until their late 20s, sometimes early 30s, so long as their parent was still alive and there was more than one heir. When John Henry Manners' father died, there was no other heir. So he had to take action and get married almost immediately, which my fictional Duke does the same thing. This meant that he also married a younger woman. In this day and age, we read a lot of books about women being considered on the shelf after about 25. That wasn't necessarily the case the higher up you went in the nobility. A lot of noble women didn't marry until their late 20s, mid to late 20s. And it was because they could afford to wait. They had lots of money. They weren't in any rush, and they wanted to pick the perfect spouse that would help their family, help their income, help their reputation, whatever it was. But anyway, wasn't the case for our Duke and Duchess here. Lady Elizabeth Howard was also quite young when they married, and she was from a noble house. Her father was an earl. So, match made in heaven. Absolutely perfect for these two. By all accounts, their marriage was quite happy as well. By our modern standards, they weren't monogamous. After Lady Elizabeth Howard had given the Duke several heirs, she had lovers. She took lovers. Some believe that even the regent himself may have been one of her lovers. And John Henry Manners was fine with that after he had his heirs, and he had lovers too. But they had, like I said, by all accounts, a very good marriage. Lady Elizabeth Howard died quite young. And it was unexpected, and it was before the actual completion of the renovations that she was doing on the castle. Apparently, the Duke went to a deep state of mourning. He was absolutely inconsolable. His peers at the time wrote about it in letters to each other about just how intense his sadness was when he lost her. He actually commissioned a beautiful statue of her that is in the castle to this day. Let's go ahead and move on. So this is the money shot, right, of this castle. This is the shot that I use the most when I'm talking about how incredible this castle is. Part of the reason for that is just how bright and bold and beautiful this is. I took this picture in December, and look at how green and gorgeous the lawns are. It's just that way in England, y'all. It's green all the time. But you can see the trees in the background. Like right up against the castle, they don't have any leaves, but the shrubbery is still quite nice. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous castle with the sun hitting it like that. The stone is very yellowy when you get up close, but it has, I think that was a brilliant move on the Duchess's part to cover the castle in this beautiful yellow stone everywhere where the sun hits it. You'll notice that towards the back a little bit where that vestibule is, that there is, just gray stone. It's just gray. It's not, because the sun is never going to hit that spot. So it really was just, the idea was really for the castle to glow in the sunlight, which I think is just absolutely amazing. The first castle that we know of that was constructed on the site was constructed in 1067. And there are still parts of what they think were that original castle in this castle. There's like a cellar area that is extremely old, and it dates back to, the Norman conquest, the age of the Norman conquest. At least that's what I'm recalling. If I say anything wrong while I'm going through this tour, I apologize. I've read so much about so many different castles. Even though this is my favorite, sometimes I get a couple of facts mixed up. But the castle as it stands today is actually the fourth iteration of a castle on this land. The Duchess, after she married the Duke, she was taken to this place, and Lady Elizabeth, she lived at the Howard Estate, the Howard Castle. It was absolutely beautiful. It was breathtaking. It was modern, and she had a great love of architecture because she was around that castle for her family growing up as it was being renovated and reconstructed and things. And so when she was presented with what Castle Beaver looked like the first time she saw it, she would have been fairly horrified. It was quite ugly before this. It was very old-fashioned. It wasn't entirely remarkable. It looked more like a fortress, and I have a small model that I'm going to show you in just a second. But she would have, excuse me, but she would have come to Castle Beaver, seen the state it was in, and not been very excited until she was realized or was told that she could remodel as she saw fit. Now, she did take some aspects of a plan that her late father-in-law had put together, and she combined that with her love of Gothic architecture, and then she did pull in an architect to help her as well. But the architect himself gives Lady Elizabeth tons of credit for how gorgeous the castle is. She had a lot of the ideas, she had a lot of the know-how, she had the skill of modern day, like the home design show people. You know what I'm talking about? Lady Elizabeth Manners could have totally done her own show on, renovating castles. So let's go ahead and talk about what it looked like before a little bit. So this is a model that they actually keep in the castle for guests to see, and it was a model created at the time when they were getting ready to change up the castle a whole bunch. As you can see, it looks way different than what we ended up with. It's very utilitarian. It's very plain. It looks more like a house than a castle. Not an exciting thing to see at all. So Lady Elizabeth did us all a favor and made the castle incredible compared to what they had to work with before. Okay, so these are two separate pictures. When you're coming up that castle drive, a lot of the times we think about people getting out and going in these like grand entry doors. Wasn't the case for this castle. You didn't enter from an exterior entrance most of the time, especially if you were an honored guest. So this is like the courtyard, this picture that is on the left. This is the courtyard that has a door that goes into kind of the entry area, the guard room. That's what it's called. But like I said, people didn't really use that if they were honored guests. Instead, you would drive through these massive double doors that you see on the right. For scale, that's my husband in the picture. He's 6'2" and he's wearing decently thick shoes right here. And that is just how massive the doors are. So if you were in a carriage, the carriage would drive through those doors because there's a matching set on the other end. And you would disembark from your carriage and be already inside the castle. And then the carriage would go ahead and pull through the rest of the way and go down to the stables where your horses and everything would be taken care of. But this is how you entered the castle, was through these massive doors. And after you stepped out of your carriage, you would step out, like if way down here at the end of this hall, this is the pre-guard room, way down here at the end of this hall is where you would actually be. So you'd come through then these two little doors, okay, and you'd have entered this long, long hallway called the pre-guard room. Um, so you're already in the castle. The second you're out of your carriage, you're in the castle, which I think is just phenomenal. Um, the decor that you see here is Victorian age decor, but there would have probably been similar things up on the walls during the Regency era. These are muskets from infantrymen who fought in the 1870s and then were given to the ducal family, duchy. I don't. They were given to the family. Um, and then the buckets above are actually for the fire brigade. The castle, prior to Elizabeth coming in and working on it, had fallen victim to a fire. And then in the middle of her refurbishing, there was another fire that destroyed some of her work on the castle. So they're very sensitive about fire. Pardon me. So anyway, but you would come through those doors that you see there, and you would walk down this long hallway. And on the other end of the hall, on the other end of the pre-guard room, you would have the guard room. And I don't have the exact right picture for that, but you'd enter this room that, as you can see, has black and white marble floors, two massive fireplaces on either side of the room, and it's just enormous. And during Lady Elizabeth's day, there were portraits up. There were probably not the animal heads. That was more of a Victorian thing. But you would have had artwork, and you would have had things that Lady Elizabeth and her husband picked up from their travels. They were also big antiquers. She also could have done a show about antiquing in Europe. So they loved it. When they opened the castle, even though it was a new build, basically in the early 1800s, they were going for a Gothic style, and they brought in a lot of ancient artwork. They brought in swords, they brought in banners, they brought in suits of armor, so that when you walked into the castle, it felt like an old, established castle, not like something that, they had just thrown together. Oh, pardon me. All right, but they have these massive fireplaces. The fireplace that's on the right, a lot of guests would have noticed this back in the day, and the Duke was very proud of this. And so were dukes that followed afterward. But as you can kind of see, there's no chimney for this massive fireplace. There is an open, airy windowway above this fireplace. And that confused a lot of people a long time ago because it wasn't something that was common. But the fireplace works as a normal fireplace does, and there is a venting system that still lets the smoke out. But it was something that people would have stood there for a minute and tried to figure out, especially if they hadn't seen something like that before. They would sit there and look at the Duke and Duchess and say, well, where's the smoke going? Where's the smoke going? I like these little, like, weird tidbits. There were several small, strange things about this castle that I feel like the Duchess did on purpose, probably just to elicit comment and to make people scratch their heads. I think she must have had a great sense of humor. So forgive the blurriness of this picture, but this is standing in between, in the middle of those two giant fireplaces in the guard room. So when you walked into the guard room, this is what you would see. I went at Christmas time, so most of my pictures have Christmas stuff in them. That's a chandelier hanging above that has been decorated and turned into a kissing ball. I don't know if you can see it, but there are even little silver berries on there. And one of the Regency traditions a long time ago was if you kiss somebody underneath a kissing ball, you would remove a berry, sometimes red, sometimes silver. And it would kind of be like a keepsake, but it would also mean that once all the berries were gone, that mistletoe or that kissing ball was no longer active. So you couldn't kiss anybody else under it. You can see the suits of armor. Those were original to Lady Elizabeth's time. So, and yes, I know that I should be calling her Her Grace or the Duchess, but I like calling her Lady Elizabeth. I'm sorry. So after you go up, so here's the staircase, a little staircase you go up, and then it splits. There's a staircase to the right and a staircase to the left. The one on the right leads to the Earl's Landing, and that's the one that they take you to when or they encourage you to go to when you're touring. So my husband and I went up to the right, and you can see there's another staircase that direction. And that staircase is what takes you to the Earl's Landing. Now, when you go up that staircase, if you stay on that level instead of going up the second staircase, you turn to the right, you can look out over the guard room. And I thought it would be interesting for y'all to see just like these massive windows above that room. There is so much natural light in this castle. The windows are all huge, enormous, gorgeous windows. So you can see the windows over there. And then from that same landing where I took the picture of those windows, you can look out over that little courtyard and to the vestibule where the carriages would come in. So if you were waiting for guests and like anticipating their arrival, this would be a good place to hang out if you didn't want to have to watch them come all the way up the hill. So, you'd see the carriage pull in. It's like, oh, now we need to go downstairs and get ready to greet them. So pretty fun. And again, just look at that window in the vestibule. I mean, the windows are all massive. They're gorgeous. They're works of art in and of themselves. So I absolutely love all the windows. All right, so here we are at that same landing. I was looking out the window in the background from the picture on the left to take that picture out over into the vestibule and courtyard area. The picture on the left is from the castle's website. It's not one I took. I took the one on the right from the top of that same staircase looking down. And again, it's Christmas time. You can tell by all the greenery. So everything in this castle is like that. Look at the rails. Look at just, it's opulent. There's a scene in one of my next books where I talk about my hero sliding down a banister. This is the banister that we're going to be talking about in that book. So pretty cool. Or at least my banister is the fictional one that's based on that one in reality. I apologize again for the state of the blurry pictures. I was trying my best to just throw something together really quick. So the picture on the left is what the ballroom looked like when I was there visiting. Massive tree. You can see the people behind it. This tree is just huge, reaching all the way up to that ceiling. This tree is actually a replica of a tree that was really well described by guests at the castle during the Regency era. So I know there's all this debate about whether or not there were Christmas trees during the Regency. There were Christmas trees. They just weren't all that common. Now, the Duke and Duchess during the Regency era would have been friends with the King and Queen. I mean, when you're Duke and Duchess, that's as close as you can get to being royalty. And so, there's like, they're regular friends. They party at each other's houses, that kind of a thing. So Queen Charlotte had a tree either in 1800 or 1801 in her castle. Most likely, if the Duke and Duchess weren't there in attendance, I think they were, but I'm a little sketchy on those details. They would have seen Queen Charlotte's tree that she brought in for Christmas. And they would have been like, oh, that's a great idea. And most likely they would have adapted that or adopted that tradition into their own home, because of course you're going to mimic whatever the royals are doing. Christmas trees didn't take off in true popularity where they were in everybody's homes until the Victorian era. That is true. But people who knew about Queen Charlotte's tradition or who were friends with people like the Duke and Duchess probably would have adopted the tradition at some point or another, even if it wasn't something they did every year. I mean, think about it. You'd say, oh, I saw this done at somebody's house. We should try to do that this year. We adapt and adopt each other's traditions. So this Christmas tree is a replica of an actual tree that the Duke and Duchess had during the Regency era in their castle. Christmas trees during the Regency were a thing. So let's continue on, because that's my soapbox moment for today. On the right, you can see this other really cool picture. And again, I'm sorry for the blurriness of the ballroom when it's not Christmas. As you can see, it's fairly narrow and quite long. There weren't a ton of balls that were actually hosted here. Today, they use this room to perform marriage ceremonies. But there you go. That's how you would dance. Now, what's interesting too is the ballroom had its own set of stairs on the far end. Tourists aren't allowed to see those stairs because they're also part of the family's private area. But at the far end, there would be stairs that led out to the outside, out to fresh air and all that kind of thing. And people would have come and gone to the ball from those stairs. I don't really understand how that works. I've looked at diagrams again and again, and I just need to do some more study on that. But there you go. That's the ballroom. So this is one of my favorite rooms in the castle, and I bring it up a lot because it's the dining room. I mean, the heart of any home really is where the family sits down for dinner, right? So this is the formal dining room. Directly underneath this dining room, there's a smaller but still gorgeous version where the family would take meals if nobody else was around. But this is the formal dining room where you would take guests, where you would have big parties and things like that. As you can see, it's huge. That table is enormous. Those chairs are gigantic. They are not delicate chairs. And you could easily fit double the number of chairs that are there right now around that table, and people would still be fairly comfortable. So you can see the tiles too up above. And true story, each of those tiles is different. There are no two tiles that match. And there's subtle differences, sometimes in the greenery, sometimes in the number of like flowers that are in the greenery, but none of those tiles match. And one of the fun games that the Duke liked to play, the Duke that was, there when this was put together, was he would challenge his guests to find the two matching tiles. He would tell them only two matched, good luck, and go. And that was really one way to keep your guests distracted during dinner, especially if you weren't in the mood to talk to them. Because if the Duke challenges you to do something, you're going to do it, especially if he says, and almost no one can do it. You're going to try to prove that you can. You can find those matching tiles, but they didn't exist. So fun. Fun side note, that giant tureen that you see there, that giant punch bowl, it is enormous. You can kind of see the handles are made out of, it's all silver, but the handles are part of a peacock motif. The peacock has long been the animal, the symbol for the Dukes of Rutland. So I thought that was kind of cool. Underneath that is a set of swords, okay? But you see that tablecloth that everything's resting on? That is not a tablecloth. I cannot figure this out. I need to do, again, some more research. That is marble. That is white marble, and it is attached to that marble underneath it. That's all one piece. That is not a tablecloth. That is like a pedestal, and it's all carved and very confusing, and I will be doing more research and work into that. But that is part one of my tour of the castle, and it had to be part one because I am very long-winded when I talk about this castle. But hopefully you found it interesting and enjoyed your time. So I'm Sally Britton, and those are my dogs barking in the background. Have a great day.